it was a port on both sides, right? So important because it was the main flow of trade and traffic in that area, because people had to cross through Corinth from one water to the other water to get their things to sell. What else?
Uh, I remember the people of Corinth made by slaves and poor people.
Yep, made up of slaves and poor people and freed slaves. They call them freedmen. So they used to be slaves and they've been set free. Anything else about Corinth? Oh.
From the videos that we watched, I remember the name for Erastus was written on the stone.
Mm-hmm. The name of Erastus is on the stone. Yes. So you have something else?
Good night from campus, Jacob. What I remember, some of the building they were very classic building at that time in Corinth. Yeah, and they were used for different purposes, like uh, Paul was addressing the issue about the sexual immorality at that time, and the mountain that people they went up. There was a building up at the higher mountain that they went up to worship and do all sorts of evil thing up there. By worshiping an evil lady or something. Yeah.
The Temple of Aphrodite. All right. So, are you saying something? Okay. So this letter to the Corinthians was written almost 2,000 years ago, but it's still important to us, and it's always going to be a useful tool for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, as the Bible says. So we're going to look at a few things of here about the book, give us some more background before we go into the book itself. So I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of books of the Bible, there is debate on who the authors are. So a lot of the books, they're not sure who wrote them exactly. Even books that we think we know who wrote them, like the book of Daniel. There's people who say that at least part of Daniel was written hundreds of years later. So maybe the whole thing wasn't written by Daniel. So there's scholars that debate this and come up with the ideas of who wrote the books. Corinthians is not really one of those books. Almost everybody agrees that Paul wrote it. There's other books that we're unsure of, things like the books of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. We don't know if it was the Apostle John that wrote those or not. But there's the book of Corinthians is recognized as having Paul as the author. A number of reasons for that. There's evidence both inside the book itself and outside the book that gives us the idea that he was the author. Inside the book, he starts it by identifying himself in, let me open this up, in verse 1. Sorry, I should have had Corinthians open already. Okay, so verse 1 of Corinthians, it tells us, Paul, called to be an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, and our brother Sosthenes. Okay, so he tells himself that it is him. He also tells us in fastest way to go ahead. He also tells us in verse 16:21 that I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. Okay, so he's again identifying himself here as the writer and saying he's writing with his own hand. So inside the book, we have that evidence. We also have outside of the Bible, which is always a great place to verify the words to be true. Whenever people question the words of the Bible, we can point to things outside the Bible. So, well, first off, again, we also know that the way that he writes this letter is pretty much the same as all the other letters written by Paul. It has the same flow, right? It has the same structure and the same style that he usually uses. But outside of the Bible, we have a man named Clement of Rome. I apologize, I didn't get a PowerPoint made tonight, so you'll have to do your best. But let me see if I can type this for you so you can see it. Just type one for Okay. All right. Hopefully, did it stop sharing? It's weird. Okay, so Clement of Rome, who was a church leader in the 1st century. So this was a man who wasn't one of the apostles. He's not in the Bible, but he was a Christian who became a Christian from one of the apostles, right? So he's like a direct secondary source, right? He didn't meet Jesus, he didn't walk with Paul, but he was evangelized by the apostles. So he is an early Christian from the first, within within 50 years after Corinthians was written, Clement of Rome was quoting 1 Corinthians, okay, and he says that Paul is the author. So this is somebody who was very close to it. He's a very close member of the church, very close to the apostles, and he's written, his works are still available, you can find his stuff, and he quotes 1 Corinthians and talks about Paul, okay? We have other church fathers from early on. These are a little bit later. Ignatius and Polycarp. These are, I believe Ignatius was a disciple of John. I might be wrong on that. I believe he was a disciple of John, and he talks about Corinthians and identifies Paul. So we have evidence from outside of the Bible. Okay. Often, also in his books, his letters, Paul names a coworker. A lot of times in the first few verses of his letters, he talks about somebody who's with him. In this case, he talked about Sosthenes. Right? So we have, back to chapter 1. So we have on our brother Sosthenes. So we don't know exactly who Sosthenes is, but apparently he's there at this time that Paul is writing Corinthians. Okay, this doesn't mean that whenever Paul names somebody else, in a lot of books he names somebody else with him. Paul and our brother Timothy, or Paul, and he names somebody else with him. That doesn't mean that person had anything to do with the content of the letter, but often that person is present while he's writing, and very possibly the person is the actual writer of the letter while Paul is dictating it. He's speaking it, and this person is writing for him. What we know from Paul's letters is that he is possibly needs glasses, right? Or is just getting old or something, because he says, in one of his books, he says, "See how I write with such big letters with my own hand," because he's hard to see, so he writes really big. So Paul doesn't typically write his own letters. He speaks it, and somebody else writes for him, because his handwriting is very poor, or he doesn't have very good sight, something. So when he names Sosthenes, we don't know for certain, but very possibly he is the one writing. Paul is speaking, and he is writing. Until we get to that end, which we'll cover in a few weeks, when we get to the end, when he says, see how I write this with my own hand. So the letter, if you had the physical letter in front of you, you would see the handwriting change from small, good handwriting to big letters, sloppy handwriting from Paul. He changes it and says, "See, I'm writing this part with my own hand." Okay? So we don't know who Sosthenes is, but he could be the Sosthenes that is in Acts 18, which we'll read about shortly. He was a ruler of the synagogue in Corinth. Okay, so he's a man from Corinth, a man of prominence, so he would have the ability to write well. He's educated. He's the ruler of the synagogue, so he's educated and he can probably write. If this is the same Sosthenes, then he must have become a believer. We don't hear about him becoming a believer in Acts 18, but he must have become a believer, and then he must have traveled to visit Paul, because we know that Paul is not in Corinth when he writes the letter to the Corinthians, right? So Sosthenes came to him. So possibly he's he's from the synagogue in Corinth. All right. And then we see who he's writing to. Okay, the recipients. Paul is writing to the church of God in Corinth, to those sanctified in Christ Jesus and called to be his holy people, together with all those everywhere who call in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, their Lord and ours. Okay, so he is writing to Church of God in Corinth. And in the word church here, in Greek, is the word ecclesia. And normally in Greek, the word ecclesia just refers to a gathering of people. It's just a group of people. But when they started writing the New Testament, ecclesia became associated with a special group, those who were gathered as believers in Jesus Christ. So now ecclesia means the church that belongs to Jesus Christ. Before Jesus came, ecclesia just meant a group of people that were gathered together, but then it changed, the meaning changed. So this letter wasn't just written to any group, it was written to those who were already believers in Corinth. It's for the benefit of the believers, the church that he helped plant when he was there. All right. I want to look for a moment at all right, we're going to look at the life of Paul, the timeline of Paul here. Okay. Sorry, this formatting got all messed up, but doesn't matter. You can see what it says. Okay, so here are the best estimates that scholars have on Paul's life. Okay, so he was born around 5 to 10 AD. All right, so this is, a number of years after Jesus was born. Now, as a side note, what year was Jesus born? You say 4? AD? Sorry, be clear. What time? When was Jesus? When was Jesus born?
Six or between 4 and 6 BC.
Between 4 and 6 BC. That's correct.
BC.
So between 4 to 6 BC, which BC stands for before Christ. All right. So so then we have 1 through 3 BC that says before Christ, but really it was after Christ. But this all came about because of a monk. You may already know this. A monk, hundreds of years later, I believe it was in like the 600s AD, who made up the calendar. We have the Gregorian calendar, right? The monk created the calendar, and he did his research on when Jesus was born, and he did his research wrong. And so he labeled 0 or 1 as like when Jesus was born. And then later scholars figured out he was wrong, so they changed it. And because of that, technically, BC and AD are not completely accurate. So some people change this to CE. And Jesus would have been born in 4 to 6 BCE. So CE being common era, and BCE before common era, right? That's how some people have changed it, but it doesn't really matter. You can say this is BC and this is AD, which are Christian terms that not everybody follows Christianity, so secular scholars prefer the other ones because they don't want to associate the Christian terms with them, but whatever. Either way, so Paul is born about 10 to 15 years after Jesus. His conversion happens around 33 AD, right? The same, shortly after Jesus has been killed and gone back to heaven, then Paul is converted because he's persecuting the apostles. We have there's a famine in 46 where he's coming for a visit, and then he has his first missionary journey somewhere between 46 to 49. He goes back to the Jerusalem Council where they argue about Gentiles being part of the church in 50. His second missionary journey, 50 to 52. Now this is when he visits Corinth, right? 50 to 52, he visits Corinth. Third missionary journey, 53 to 58. He gets imprisoned by Caesar, 58 to 60. In Caesarea, he gets imprisoned in Rome, 61 to 63. Possibly to Spain in 63 to 66, and then he dies around 67 AD. Okay, so that's Paul's timeline. One year that we are pretty confident in, when Paul is in Corinth, he appears before Gallio, who took office in the middle of the year of 52 AD. So he couldn't appear before Gallio before 52 AD. So his second missionary journey, when he goes to Corinth, he has to somehow be in Corinth in 52 or later, right, when Gallio is in charge. If he comes before that, so that's one timeline effect that we know is true, that we're looking at. Again, this is looking at historical and archaeological evidence outside of the Bible. We figure out this timeline. Okay? So, we talked a lot talked and watched the video of what Corinth was like. Corinth was an important city, we know that. It was built on that narrow strip of land, which is called an isthmus. Let's go back to... Make sure that is being shared. Okay. Okay, an isthmus, which is, it has two silent letters here that we don't say. Isthmus, which is a connection point between you have two pieces of land and a narrow piece of land that connects them. A very thin strip, two bigger pieces and a narrow strip. Okay, an isthmus. And because that, it stood between two important bodies of water where they wanted to do trade. Where's my mouse? There we go. Okay, so we have there's a route you can go. If you're part of Greece and you want to trade, you could sail around here to Athens. But there's a lot of storms, there's a lot of pirates, it's dangerous to go this way. So they prefer a much faster way to come through here, sail in this way, stop at Corinth, get their stuff out, take it by cart, pulled by horses or oxen or like mules across, and then put it on another boat here and take it. Okay, it's much safer. But because of that, because people are stopping here, Corinth starts to make a lot of money, right? You can charge a fee every time you want to go through here. You could charge, or they might stop and sell their goods here, or so Corinth becomes very rich. It was only about 6 kilometers wide at its smallest spot, so very short distance across there from one water to another. Otherwise, they have to go 300 kilometers around the outside here. So it's much faster to go through. All right. Also, this is the only, let's see. This is the only path by land. If you want to, let's say you're growing goods down in here somewhere, and you want to bring it up, you have to go through Corinth to get to the rest of Greece if you want to go by land. Right? So it's also the only way to get to this whole island by land. Right? So you have the boat routes, you have the land routes. So between those two, it becomes very rich. My screen just went black over here. Sorry. Oh, there it just came back. Okay. Okay, so almost every kind of item imaginable could be found and purchased in the markets in Corinth. Oh, you guys can see it. It's black for me. But my screen is black, but they can still see it there. Also, something else we talked about before, the Isthmian Games. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so moving that for a second. So the Isthmian Games was an athletic competition that was second only to the Olympics. So the Olympics were the number one game, and then you have the Isthmian Games. So you have like the South Pacific Games, right? And then you have the Olympics, but this one was the Isthmian Games, were the second most important games. So that's going to bring a lot of people there. And then we also talked about how Corinth is known for its wickedness, right? It's a morally corrupt city. So there was the old city of Corinth. The videos talked about that during the. Okay, so. It's good right now. Thank you. Oh, and then it went off. Yeah, it keeps doing that. I'll look up there. Okay. Old Corinth was destroyed in 146 BC. New Corinth was rebuilt in 46 BC by Caesar. And they turned it into a Roman colony, and it became the province of this part of the Roman Empire. But both Old Corinth and New Corinth were both sinful, corrupt cities. They didn't change in between. They were bad before, they became bad again. It was not a good place if you're looking for good morals. The city had a reputation. Oh, I'm not sharing that right now. Okay, sorry. Sorry for those online. Okay, there you go. So the city had a reputation for sexual permissiveness. We talked about that with the temple of Aphrodite and the 1,000 prostitutes they had. And it became so bad that throughout the whole Roman Empire, the phrase started to Corinthianize, means to live like a Corinthian in sexual immorality. So to Corinthianize something, it means it's sexually immoral. So it becomes so bad that even their name of their city has to do with sin. Originally, when Corinth was settled, Nathaniel mentioned that earlier, that it was settled with the freedmen, the slaves, and the poor people. But then, as it became a center of trade and wealth, many people started to come there. They had many different nationalities, races, religions, mixed all together, different cultures. So the Greek religion and philosophy were still present because Rome kind of took over the Greek ideas of sculptures and architecture and artwork. But it started to be mixed in with other things as well. So there must have been enough Jews to come there to build the Jewish synagogue. Okay, so that was the place that Paul found that was dedicated to worship of the one true God in a city that was full of, I don't know if you've ever had to study Greek mythology in school, where they talk about all the ancient Greek gods of Zeus and Hera and Aphrodite and Hades, all these Greek gods they worshiped. Kind of like Hinduism, they had thousands of gods that they worship, a god for everything. That's what Greek culture was like, and the Romans took over that religion. So then it became Roman religion as well. They changed the names of the gods. So Aphrodite was a Greek god. They changed her name to Diana. So the goddess Diana and the goddess Aphrodite are the same. Okay, so Romans took over the same religions. They have thousands of gods they worship. That's why when Paul enters Athens, he says, I see that you are very religious people. Like you have altars to everything, right? You have shrines and altars for every god, even to an unknown god, because they're afraid they might have missed one, right? So they have the unknown god, because they worship every god they can think of. And in the middle of all that, you have a group of Jewish people that worship the one true God in the synagogue. Okay, so they're kind of the outcasts or the the minority in this city full of sin, where they worship all these thousands of gods. All right. So, I said earlier, Paul was not in Corinth when he wrote this, but a lot of his letters we have to guess where he is, but we don't have to guess in this one. Right. 1 Corinthians 16, verse 8. He says right here, but I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost. Okay? Oh, I said share, but I guess it... Try again. Is that working? No? Okay, let me do that. Okay. So I will stay on Ephesus until Pentecost. Okay, so we know that he is in Ephesus right now. But it's less easy to know when he wrote the letter. Okay? So we know that he visited Corinth on his second missionary journey. But we think he wrote the letter while he was on his third missionary journey. Okay, so likely the year 55 or 56, we had looked at. Let me cancel that. Okay, so they can still see that? Is that still shared? Okay. So, third missionary journey, sometime 53 to 58. So we think that he wrote the letter to Corinthians when he was on that journey, probably around 55 or 56. It could be 57, or like we don't know exactly when it was, but on his third missionary journey, we know that he stayed 2.5 years in Ephesus. Right, so we're trying to piece together things, right? When you're a scholar, a historical scholar here, trying to piece this together, we know that he traveled to Ephesus. So we know it has to be after his second missionary journey. We know that he's in Ephesus. So logically, his third missionary journey, he went to Ephesus. So probably it's on that trip. And we know that he did that 53 to 58, so sometime in there, 55, 56, 57, don't know for sure. But it was before Pentecost as well. All right. So, let's look at Paul's okay. The time that Paul spent with his contact with the Corinthians. Okay. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so here's what we know about Paul and the Corinthians. The first time he goes to the Corinthians, he goes and he visits them. Okay, during his second missionary journey, and we know that he stays for 1.5 years. When he leaves, there's a church. Okay, and he leaves Corinth in around AD 52. Okay, we can find all this in Acts, which we're actually going to read that together in a little bit here. Okay, now something that I mentioned before is that there are missing letters to the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 5. What was it? 5:9. Okay. 1 Corinthians 5:9. I wrote you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Okay, but this is in 1 Corinthians. But he's saying, I wrote to you in my letter not to do this. So what does that tell us? It means that there is a missing letter to the Corinthians. Because this is his second letter. He already wrote to them before. I wrote to you in my letter. And then this is the one that we get. Okay? So, his previous letter, we know almost nothing about it. It's only in what we call 1 Corinthians, okay, that he mentions it in Corinthians 5:9. Okay? So now, some people have come to visit Paul. That's his next interaction. Corinthians, back here again. 1 Corinthians 1. All right, 1:11. My brothers and sisters, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. Okay, so we know that some people from Corinth have come to visit him. Okay? So this is his next interaction. So piecing together the timeline here, he visited there, he wrote them a letter after he left. That letter got lost. Then some people came to visit him from Corinth after he had written to them. Okay? And then a letter was written to Paul. So this is probably after the visit from Chloe, the visit after the members of Chloe's household. Then they send a letter. Okay. It says a letter and probably a verbal report from the carriers informed Paul of a number of other issues in the Corinthian church, and that caused Paul to write a second letter, which is 1 Corinthians. Okay, so he gets a visit, then he gets a letter. And then we know that he sends Timothy there. Okay, if we look. First Corinthians 4:17, for this reason, I have sent to you Timothy, my son whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord. Okay? So, Paul is sending Timothy to go. Let's look at this other one really quick about the letter they sent. Right here he says, now for the matters you wrote about. Okay, so he's referring to the letter. And here, I was glad when Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Archaeus arrived because they have supplied what was lacking from you. Okay, so it's possible these three people could either be bringing the letter, or they could be the members of Chloe's household. Right, so they arrived from Corinth, but we don't know if they brought the letter, or they're from the members of Chloe's household he referred to, or maybe they're both. Maybe they're the members of Chloe's household and they brought a letter from other people. Okay? So again, we have first missionary journey, he visits, sends a letter that gets lost, people come to visit him, he gets a letter from them, he sends Timothy to them. And then we have another missing letter. Oh, sorry. First we have the letter of the Corinthians. Okay, so he writes the Corinthian letter. Okay? And then Paul goes back to Corinth. Okay? We have a point where Paul goes back. Let's see. We're gonna jump to. Okay. 2 Corinthians 2. So I made up my mind that I would not make another painful visit to you. Okay, he's referring to a visit that happens in between the first letter and the second letter. And we can see it also in 12. Now I'm ready to visit you for a third time. Okay, so we know he visited the first time on his second missionary journey. And we know that he visited again sometime between 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, because he's going to go a third time. Okay, so what we don't know is what he says in the next letter. Okay, he writes them a severe letter. After Paul left Corinth, he was determined to write another letter, a very strong one, and send it to Corinth with Titus. Paul says that he wrote the severe letter out of great distress and anguish of heart with many tears. We don't have a copy of this letter. Some scholars think that chapters 10 to 13 of 2 Corinthians are in fact that letter, and were attached to the Corinthians. Maybe. We don't know. Okay, so let's see that. 2 Corinthians 2:4. Okay. For I wrote to you out of great distress and anguish of heart with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love. Okay, so that is referring to the in-between letter, the third letter. Okay, even if I caused you sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it. I see that my letter hurt you, but only for a little while. Okay, so he's referring to another missing letter. Okay? So we have 1 Corinthians, he visits them, he writes them a letter, it gets lost. Titus gives them the letter, so he says it sends the letter with Titus. Titus gives them the letter. He comes back and tells Paul, and that there's not a great report from Titus. Okay? So then Paul writes the fourth letter, 2 Corinthians. So we know that this letter was written around 56, and he talks about a plan for another visit to Corinth. Now, we don't know if he ever does that visit. We have no record of a fourth visit, but it's possible. So we have he has this long interaction with them. He visits them 3 times. He writes them 4 letters. He sends at least Timothy and Titus to visit them. They send him letters back and people back to visit him. So he has this long interaction with them. Okay, and some scholars, like it said, will claim that 2 Corinthians 10 to 13 is the missing third letter. Now, we're not getting into 2 Corinthians, but if you choose to read that on your own, you can decide. 2 Corinthians 9, it could kind of be an ending here. Okay, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. He could kind of be concluding a letter here. You could make that argument that this is the end of a letter. And then 10 is the start of the next letter. So he's starting, by the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you, I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I am away. Okay, so he's naming himself at the start of a letter, like he always does. Right? He always starts his letters by saying, I, Paul. So here he's naming himself. So possibly 10 is the start of another letter. Now, we don't know. You can decide for yourself if you want to decide, or just leave it up to the scholars that talk about these things. 1 through 9 could be the fourth letter, and 10 through 13 could be the third letter. But we know for sure that the first letter is lost. We have nothing for that. Members, Rita, do you want to start with verse 1 for us?
Okay. Okay. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth.
All right. I apologize. I don't remember your name in Port Moresby. The other gentleman by
Ako.
himself.
Ako.
It's Jaco.
Okay. If you could read verse 2.
Okay. He met a Jewish named Aquila, a native of Pontus. He had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. They went to see them.
Now, lay campus. What was your name again?
Tony.
That's Junior. Okay.
Tony.
You could read verse 3.
And because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them.
Okay, so remember that part from the video? He stayed with Priscilla and Aquila, who were tent makers, just like he was. All right. Now let's start. Get pass it to Paul, and he'll go first. Okay, verse 4.
Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks.
Okay, pass it along. Oh, just press it the other way. No, to Nathaniel. That's why it'd be easier this way. Yeah.
When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah.
So what does that tell us there? When Silas and Timothy came, Paul went exclusively to preaching. So possibly he stopped doing his tent making because he had support. Silas and Timothy earned the money. They were the money makers, and Paul just preached the whole time. Okay? Verse 6.
But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles."
Okay, so he's preaching to the Jews. He's trying to evangelize Jews. They're opposing him, so he goes to the Gentiles instead.
Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titus Justus, a worshipper of God.
Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized.
Right, Crispus, the synagogue leader. Okay, so he wasn't completely in a failure with the Jews, right? He left the synagogue and went to worship and went to go speak to the Gentiles. But then the synagogue leader and his entire household believed. So it wasn't he didn't only reach Gentiles. He did get some Jews that were reached. All right, verse 9.
Verse 9, one night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid, keep on speaking, do not be silent."
Verse 10, "For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city."
So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God.
So that's how we know on this missionary journey he stayed a year and a half. It tells us right there. We also talked about this verse 10 in the video last night, that Paul was discouraged and he was a little bit maybe afraid, right? That people were going to be were going to harm him. But God tells him, "I have many people in this city." So sometimes we don't know that there's other people that God is working with when we go to a new place. We think we might be the only Christian there, but God has other people that we might not even know about. All right, verse 12.
While Galileo was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment.
Okay, so we saw that in the video too. We saw the platform where they probably had brought Paul. Again, it might not have been that exact one, but it could very possibly have been that exact platform where they brought Paul before Gallio. We also know, remember, that Gallio didn't become the proconsul of Achaia until halfway through 52 AD. So we can put a timeline to when Paul was there. Okay, verse 13.
This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law.
But since just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some
misdemeanor
or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you."
Can we have, is it Matthias? Can you read 15?
But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourself. I will not be a judge of such things.
So it's verse 16. So he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes. Okay, is this the same Sosthenes? Possibly. The synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul. And Gallio showed no concern whatever. Okay, so we see Sosthenes, but we don't hear anything about him following Jesus. But later, we see that Sosthenes came to visit Paul. Now, if it's the same one, that tells us that he became a believer while Paul was there. Also, it's possible that if the crowd is beating him up, that he's already a believer and they're mad at him for allowing Paul to stick around. Okay, so there's Sosthenes, the same one from 1 Corinthians 1. Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sisters and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Kintria because of a vow he had taken. All right. So he leaves Corinth with Priscilla and Aquila. Okay, so that's the record we have of Paul's first visit. Before he writes the first letter that gets lost, before he writes 1 Corinthians, before they had sent him a letter, before Sosthenes comes to visit him when he's in Ephesus, right? So what's something from this passage that we learn about Corinth? This is the question on the notes here. What do we learn about Corinth, the people mentioned, Paul's ministry, and the new church?
One of the things that I would like to say is Paul stopped speaking to the Jews and he turned to the Gentiles. Started visiting the Gentiles with the message.
Yes, he speaks to the Gentiles. Although we do know he reaches some Jews, right? Because we had Crispus and we have Sosthenes, who are both high up in the synagogue. What else about Corinth, the people, Paul's ministry, the new church?
Corinth is, we know, is a very rich center, the center for trading and center that was full of wealth. And at the same time, when Paul was preaching to the people of Corinth, the sinful nature was also in presence too.
Yes, thank you, Rita. Okay, we learned that. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I learned is during Paul when he left the synagogue, and one of the Titius Justice, a worshiper, one of the leader, and his whole entire household believe in Lord, and the Corinthians too believe were baptized also.
Yes, so you are mentioning Titius? I don't know. Justice, a worshiper of God. It doesn't tell us whether he's a Jew or not. He is a worshiper of God, and Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed the Lord. So, we get the impression, at least I do, in reading a lot of Paul's stuff about Paul, that he was primarily a missionary to the Gentiles, which is true. He was primarily to the Gentiles. It says Peter for the Jews and Paul for the Gentiles. But that doesn't mean he was completely ineffective with Jews, right? We know that Priscilla and Aquila were Jews, right? So we've got Priscilla and Aquila, who are Jews. We had Crispus, who's a Jew, and later we have Sosthenes, who's a Jew. Sorry, were you going to talk, Rita?
Paul not only worked with the Jews, but he also worked amongst the Gentiles too.
Yes. Okay. Any other thoughts on Okay, then All right, so we know that sometime after Paul visited Corinth, he got some members of Chloe's household came to visit him. He got a letter from them. He wrote, we're not sure when he wrote his first letter back to them, if it was maybe the members of Chloe's household came first, and he wrote his first letter, and then the letter came back and he wrote 1 Corinthians. I'm not sure, but we heard that there were divisions among the Christians. Right? Chloe's household visited Paul, said there were divisions in the church. He also got a letter that had a number of other concerns. He goes into depth about a lot of issues. We have questions about marriage, questions about lawsuits, sexual immorality, the Lord's Supper, idolatry, head coverings for women, right? There's all kinds of issues that Paul hears questions from them, right? So some of it is he hears that they're doing the wrong thing, right? They're allowing sexual immorality into the church, right? There's division in the church. Some of it is they just have questions that we don't quite understand. What should we do in this case? How do we handle this? They're asking Paul questions. And the people who delivered the letter from the Corinthians to Paul probably also gave him a verbal report of what's going on in the church and asked him lots of questions, and they would take the answers back to the people. So Paul wrote to the Corinthians to talk about these issues. They might have considered some of these issues insignificant, not important, but Paul views them as serious issues that need to be addressed. He also is trying to answer the questions that were asked. And they're confused about resurrection, and so he uses part of his letter to talk about resurrection and help them understand it. All right. So we can kind of break down a broad overview of 1 Corinthians is he does his introduction. This is verses 1 through 9 of the first chapter. I'll make this a little smaller so I can fit it all. Okay. Response to Chloe's household is chapter 1, verse 10 through chapter 4, verse 21. He's responding to Chloe's household. Other reports. So these are other things that he has heard. This is from 5:1 to 6:20. And then response to letter. So remember the letter he gets. He responds to that in 7:1 to 16:4. And then he does conclusion, farewell in 16:5 to 24. Okay, so the way we can break Corinthians down into sections. Now, there may be other ways of breaking this down. Other people might have their ideas. And close these. We're going to watch a little video once I get it set up here. This video will give us the major ideas and themes of the book, of the letter, so we can add more to your notes here as you watch this. While I do this, you'll notice on Cluster, I do have the course outline up there. If you have access to Cluster, it's up there. Also, this note page is up there. I'm trying to put the video up, but Cluster doesn't let me put big videos, so I'm trying to put it. Can you guys watch YouTube if I put it on YouTube? Or I know you can't use. Okay, I know the school Wi-Fi doesn't let YouTube, right? Or some, I don't know, but I might be able to put it a different way if that doesn't work. But I can put the video up so you can watch it. Also, your first journal reflection is going to be due next week, so make sure that you're reading 1 Corinthians. Just going to read through it and write about what is God telling you as you read it. Okay. Also, tell me which translation you read it in. Okay, if it was Pigeon or your talk place, or if it was the NIV or the King James or whatever, tell me which one you're doing. But that's going to be due next week, so make sure you're reading it. Okay, let's see if I can get this. Hold on. There's no sound. Okay. Share sound. Share.
Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, written to a church community that Paul knew really well. Corinth was a major port city in the ancient world and had lots of temples to Greek and Roman gods. It was a big economic center, and so Paul strategically came here as a missionary. He spent a year and a half there getting to know people, talking to them about Jesus, and a whole bunch of people became followers of Jesus and formed a church community. You can read about all of this in Acts chapter 18. So after a while, Paul moved on to start churches in other cities, and he started getting reports that things were not going well at all back at the church in Corinth. It was plagued by all kinds of problems, and that's why he wrote this letter. It's broken up into 5 main parts along with a final greeting. And these 5 sections correspond to 5 main problems that Paul is addressing. And so the letter reads like a collection of short essays on different topics, but there are these core ideas that unite all of the pieces together. So here's what he...
So let me pause that for you. If you want to write that down under your major themes, how is the book... So I broke it down to his responses to letters, response to people. But if you want to break it down by themes... This is one way you can break down the book a different way. So as we watch this, and he's going to go through each of these and talk about it more, I want you to be thinking about, does any of this sound familiar to Papua New Guinea context? Does any of this happen here? Does any of these issues that the Corinthians are facing, are they also happening where you are? All right. Oh, I lost the sound. Why did I lose sound? I did before. Now let's see if try this. Try it again.
Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, written to a church community while Paul moved on to start. It's broken up into five main problems that Paul is addressing. And so the letter reads like a collection of short essays on different topics, but there are these core ideas that unite all of the pieces together. So here's what he does in each section. He describes the problem, but then he always responds to that problem with some part of the story of the gospel, which is the good news about Jesus. And he shows how they're actually not living out what they say they believe. And so this letter is all about learning to think about every area of life through the lens of the gospel. So let's dive in and see how he does it. In chapters 1 through 4, the problem is that there are these divisions in the church. There are some other teachers who had come through town since Paul left. A guy named Apollos and then Peter. And people had picked their favorite teacher and then became groupies around that leader, and then started to talk bad and disrespect people who favored another leader or teacher. And so Paul, his response to this is kind of sarcastic and sharp. He says, you have to be kidding me, right? The church is not a popularity contest. The church is a community of people who are centered around Jesus. Its leaders and its teachers are simply servants of Jesus. So while you might prefer one leader more than another, it's not worth dividing over, and certainly not speaking poorly about each other. The center of the church is Jesus and the good news about who he is and what he's done. In chapters 5 through 7, Paul addresses some problems related to sex. There were a number of people sleeping around in the church. One guy with his stepmother, a number of other people still worshiping at the local temples to Greek gods and sleeping with the prostitutes who worked there. Not only that, but there were people in the church who were saying that this was all just fine. They said, hey, we're free in Christ. God's grace is bottomless, right? It's fine. Paul says it's not fine. And with the gospel in hand, he shows just how wrong-headed this kind of thinking is. He says, remember, first of all, Jesus died for your sins, including the ruin of broken relationships that's caused by sexual misconduct. And so if you're a Christian, sexual integrity is one of the main ways that we respond to Jesus' love and grace. Paul also reminds them that just as Jesus was physically raised from the dead, so our bodies will be raised from the dead, which means this. If your body is being redeemed by Jesus now and in the future, then what you do with your body matters. It matters a lot. And it's not yours to do whatever you want with. Paul's being super clear. Being a follower of Jesus involves no compromise when it comes to sexual integrity. In chapters 8 through 10, the issue is about food, but not just food preferences, like do you like or dislike a certain food. The issue the Corinthians were divided over is meat that came from animals sacrificed in the local temples to Greek and Roman gods. And there was a split between the Jewish and non-Jewish Christians about how to respond to this issue. And once again, Paul appeals to some core ideas from the gospel. He says our allegiance, first and foremost, is to Jesus as Lord, not to any other gods. And so if you're in a situation where there's meat that's been dedicated to another god, and there are people around who might watch you and conclude, oh, look, hey, Christians worship Jesus and they can worship other gods too. Paul says if that's the scenario, don't eat the meat. Your loyalty is to Jesus, and you should love those people more than yourself and not mislead them. But Paul quickly qualifies this and says, listen, as Christians, we believe God is the creator of all things, including that animal. And the temple idols, we believe, are just pieces of wood and stone. So if there's no one around who's going to misunderstand your actions and you're hungry, eat up. You're free as a new human in Christ to follow your conscience in these kind of debatable matters. So what makes it okay in one situation to eat but not in the other? The core principle is love. Love will deny itself and look out for the well-being of other people. And love, God's love, is at the core of the gospel. It's what Jesus did when he died for us, and so Paul says it's what Christians should do for other people. In chapters 11 through 14, Paul moves on and addresses problems in their weekly worship gathering. There were some people who were having really powerful spiritual experiences in the gathering, and so they would start praying out loud in unknown languages. There were other people who might start sharing a teaching or a word from God, and then someone would get up and interrupt them because they wanted to share. And it all was really chaotic, and it was distracting people, especially visitors, from hearing the gospel. So in these chapters, Paul helps them think, first of all, about the purpose of this gathering, to help them see what kind of behaviors are appropriate. He says the gathering is a place where God's Spirit should be working through everybody, and it should happen in a unified way. So he develops this cool metaphor about the church as a human body. It's one, but it has all these different parts. And each part serves a unique and important role. So he goes on to name a whole bunch of things that the Spirit does through all these different people, all for the building up of the church. That's a key phrase in these chapters. And Paul concludes that the highest value in the gathering should be a concept central to the gospel, God's love. And love is a key word in these chapters too. Love will compel each person in the gathering to use their role to serve and seek the well-being of others. So Paul applies all this to the Corinthians' problems. Some people think the purpose of the gathering is to have intense spiritual experiences or to get a chance to speak their mind. And Paul says, listen, I'm a big fan of powerful experiences of prayer, but if it distracts other people or freaks them out, I should stop it, because I'm loving myself more than I'm loving those people. The gathering around Jesus should be orderly, so everybody can learn and sing and worship and hear God speaking to them. The last problem Paul addresses is the issue of Jesus' resurrection and the future hope of Jesus' followers. There were some people in the church who were saying that the idea of resurrection is ridiculous and doesn't really matter to being a Christian. And Paul reacts to this big time. He begins by saying that the resurrection is an indispensable part of the gospel. We believe in it because of the hundreds of eyewitnesses that saw Jesus alive in a physical body after being publicly executed by the Romans. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Paul says, then his death was meaningless. We are all still lost in our sin and selfishness. We should just stop being Christians. Paul then shows in detail how the resurrection was Jesus' victory over death and evil, how it's a source of life and power for us now in the present, and how it's a promise of future hope for the whole world. It's because of the resurrection that we have a reason to be unified around Jesus. It's the reason we have motivation for sexual integrity. It's the source of power for loving other people more than ourselves. And ultimately, it's our hope for victory over death. And so, Paul concludes, we do believe Jesus was raised from the dead, which means this. The gospel is not just moral advice or a recipe for private spirituality. It's an announcement about Jesus that opens up a whole new reality. And that's what 1 Corinthians is all about, seeing every part of life through the lens of that gospel.
Okay, so an overview of 1 Corinthians, a way we can break it down into these themes where there's these problems, division, sexual immorality, food, problems in the church gatherings, questions about the resurrection. And Paul addresses each of those with the gospel and points it back to how Jesus' death on the cross gives us a reason for all of this, and it gives us our victory. So, in Papua New Guinea, do you see divisions in the church? Do you see divisions among? Yeah. Now, in their days, they claimed to follow one person or another, and that always reminds me of our denominations today. Like when all of you introduced yourselves last time and you say, I'm part of the Evangelical Free Church, or I'm part of the Baptist Church, I'm part of the Nazarene Church, I'm part of the... So, right, not that denominations are a bad thing. I also would claim a denomination that I fellowship with, but if it becomes to the point that we are talking bad about the others and we're driving division in God's global church, then it becomes an issue. I have a friend who will constantly speak poorly of other church groups on his Facebook page. He doesn't attack the devil or the works of Satan. He attacks other churches, saying they're doing this wrong, they're doing this wrong. He's saying this is the way they're doing worship is sinful, right? He speaks, and I said, like, you're causing divisions in the church by saying my way is better than your way of following God, and that's creating division in the church. So I follow a denomination. I try to go to those church services. I keep up with the news of my group. But I also like to work with others. I want to be a partner with others. And it actually causes me distress when I go, even in America or here, when I go someplace and I find two churches next door to each other, right? Two buildings. You can go, there's a village, can't remember where it was. I went there long ago, 12 years ago. I went to a place down the road where you walk in and there was an EBC church and a Nazarene church next door to each other. Two churches right next door. And not only is it two churches, but it's two churches that teach almost the exact same theology. So we're putting all of this resource and effort into our two churches, and we're splitting the members of this village into two churches. Like I know it's not a likely dream, but I picture, what if all the churches of Papua New Guinea talk together and say, here's a village with no church. Who's got the resources to put a church there? Okay, you, Baptist, you put a church there. Okay, now this village has no church. Who's going to do that one? And we do there. Instead of, well, we're going to put a church there, and we're going to, and now we're going to put three churches here. This village has nothing. This village has three. So, like, what if we all work together? And we're so concerned with our way is right, our belief is right, our theology is right, that we don't work together, right? So we have this, maybe it's not the same division that they had in Paul's time, but what if we worked better together to reach more people faster? So, divisions in the church. Paul addresses that. Is there any sexual immorality in PNG? Yes. Yes. My wife is a nurse. She's going to be working at the clinic here. And she went over there and met with Sister Tracy, or the nurse over there at the clinic. And Sister Tracy told my wife that if they have 5 pregnant women come into the clinic, 4 of them will have a sexually transmitted disease, usually because their husband is not faithful. Right? So they're causing problems for their wife and for their new babies with diseases that are spread through sex because of sexual immorality. Right? 4 out of 5 women that come to the clinic have a husband. Possibly the woman herself could also be, but according to Sister Tracy, she said it was more the husbands, but it could go both ways. But brokenness caused by sexual immorality. Okay, the next one, food. Now, this one is one where you have to look a little deeper, because if we look at it just as the surface, food that's sacrificed to idols, maybe that's an issue specifically in PNG, food sacrificed to idols. But I know in America we don't sacrifice food to idols, so it's not an issue. So we could say that, oh, this doesn't apply. But what this really is talking about is, like it's in this video it showed, if food is sacrificed to an idol, and then you eat the food in front of a non-believer, they might think that you are okay worshiping that idol. But if you eat the food and there's nobody that can see you, then you know that the idol is nothing. The idol is not a real God, right? It's just a piece of wood or something, and the food is fine. So the purpose of this is don't do things that are going to cause other people to fall into sin or to think that you are sinning, things that are going to harm your witness. So, as we talk about different denominations in the church, some groups say that all alcohol is bad. This is an issue in America. I don't know if it's an issue here. Some groups will say you cannot ever drink any beer. No, some church members should never drink it. Other churches say, well, the Bible says don't get drunk on wine, but that means you can have some alcohol if you aren't getting drunk. So they will say our church members can have beer or wine, and it's okay. This other church says don't drink it. Okay, so now, if you go and you drink beer in public where other people see you, if you see me walking down the road drinking SP, does that harm your view of me, my witness to the church? Yes, right?
Yes.
I might think, well, I'm Nazarene like Paul, so our church thinks no alcohol, but if I was part of a group like Lutheran or Presbyterian, and again, I don't know at PNG if it's different. In America, Lutheran, Presbyterian churches, they say it's okay to have a little bit of alcohol. Don't get drunk, but have a little bit. They think it's okay. If I was Presbyterian, to me, drinking an SP is okay, right? It's okay. I'm not sinning. The Bible says it's okay as long as I don't get drunk. So I go walking down the road drinking it because it's okay to me. But you see it and you think I'm not a good Christian, right? I'm harming my witness to you. So what this means, what this is talking about, this food to idols, it means even if you think it's okay, you read the Bible, your theology, you think this is okay, your church that you work fellowship with, they say it's okay. But if doing it in public makes somebody else less likely to become a Christian, don't do it in public. If you don't think it's a sin and your church doesn't think it's a sin and you're okay with it, do it inside your house, right? If it's going to cause other people trouble, don't do it out in public. Okay, this applies when you're doing cross-cultural, like things that are okay in America might not be okay here. Okay? So I have to be aware of where I live and make sure that I'm not doing things that cause trouble to my ministry in PNG. Same thing with you when you go out. If you're going to cause trouble to your ministry, if you're going to cause trouble to the church, lead people away from Jesus with whatever you're doing, even if you think it's okay, don't do it where they can see you. I know that sounds kind of sneaky, like do it in secret, We don't want to sin in secret, right? The Bible talks about don't sin in secret, like the light will expose it. But if you're doing something that in your heart you believe is not a sin, but it's going to cause somebody else to think you're sinning, don't do it where they can see it. That's what the food to idols is about. If you can eat food sacrificed to idol in your own house because you don't believe that idol is anything, you're not worshiping the idol, you're just having supper. You're just eating food. All right? Go ahead and eat it. But if you're eating it and someone's watching you and they think you're worshiping that false god right now, you're worshiping that other god, you're worshiping God and an idol at the same time because you're eating that food, then don't eat it where they can see you. Does that make sense? Now, I don't know if there's issues like that in PNG. Probably issues where if there's something that's from the village, the place, you got rituals that happen, or you've got ceremonies or you've got, I don't even know, you've got, again, there's the alcohol, there's the ideas of even there are idols here, right? There's worship of ancestors and idols, so maybe those issues come up more, but it'll be interesting when we get to discussion of that, what you have. All right, and then we're out of time, but quickly, the gathering. This is issues inside the church. You have new believers who, this kind of goes back to the same as the food to idols. You've got new believers that are brand new in the church, and they see somebody speaking in tongues, they see somebody else trying to preach, and somebody else interrupting them and preaching on top of them, and now you have these new believers that are very confused. They don't know what's going on in church, right? So people want to look important, so they say, no, let me speak in church, or I'm going to be important and stand up and speak in tongues, and I'm going to look important. So what they're doing is they're trying to get glory for themselves, and they're not thinking about the new believers that are being confused, right? They're messing them up. So both of those you put in this video, it's about loving others more than yourself. Both of these issues are, don't make it about you in church. It's not about you. It's about how can you love the other people in the church to make them draw closer to God through the worship service. It's not about whether you think something's right or wrong with the food to idols. It's about whether you're causing somebody else to fall away from God through what you're doing. So we're loving our neighbors more than ourselves in both of these cases. And then the resurrection, people saying there is no resurrection, but Paul is saying the resurrection is essential. If there is no resurrection, we have no hope. We have no reason to be Christians if there is no resurrection. Our entire faith is meaningless if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. All right, so that's our overview. On Tuesday, we will start chapter 1, going through it, talking about it, and yes, make sure you're reading 1 Corinthians and write a reflection. Good. Where's the microphone? Oh, Caleb, right? Go ahead and close us in prayer.